Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first guest episode of Triton Squadron featuring James Floyd, also better known as Java James. Would you care to introduce yourselves?
Sure. I'm James Floyd. I am a UCSD alumni, and I currently write for Star Wars Insider Print Magazine, and I've been involved in fandom for decades.
Also featuring our various co-hosts. Do you care to introduce yourselves just one at a time?
Yeah, sure. My name is Anish. I've been on this podcast a couple of times by now, so hopefully y'all know who I am.
Yeah, this is Brian, old co-host. I'm back. Really excited for this episode. I scrolled through some of James' old podcasts on Star Warsologies, and they all looked really interesting.
I'm Liam, also previous host, and now just excited for this episode in specific.
Yeah, and I'm Stant, also previous co-host, and looking forward to this year, especially this episode. So, let's get started. So, James, a lot of us from the Star Wars Club met you at your during Comic Con. Does anyone want to talk about that? I think Anish had something to say.
Yeah, sure. So I believe this was Friday at Comic-Con. I was walking by the big mural, the Star Wars Rebels mural, and someone told me, they were like, "Yo, you have an Andor costume. Did you hear about the one-way out run that was happening?" And I was like, "No, what's that?" And then they mentioned it was happening outside at like 3:30 or something like that, just outside the convention center, right? So I didn't hear much else about it, so I was like, "Is it still happening?" So I went back and they didn't have any more information. So I went outside with Shane and Liam at around 3, and then I ran into James actually, I think right around that time, right?
Yeah, yeah. That you guys just happened to be in the right area. That was a great place to gather before we went outside because it was hot out there. But yeah, we were all in our Narkina 5 prisoner costumes, ready to go one way out and run through the convention center. Yeah, that we had, I guess, maybe about 20 people overall in it, and we started off outside, and we took some pictures with people, and then started in, and we went up one of the escalators and down another, and then through the con floor, chanting one way out, and it was a lot of fun.
It
Yeah.
was really fun. It was so funny to me because I didn't realize you guys were basically going to go through the whole building, and I was struggling to keep up and filming the whole thing. But it was really fun that we ended right at the mural.
Yeah, super fun just to walk through, just chant it, and how pretty much everyone around us just like stopped what they were doing, just looked at us, and were like cheering us on. That was a lot of fun. And then later that same day in the evening, we had the Andor panel that you hosted, James, the one about the sort of the philosophy and the psychology behind certain of the ideas and characters in Andor, right?
Yeah, yeah, Andor making a rebel, making a rebellion was the title of my panel, and we had a variety of people: a psychologist, a sci-fi author, some a writing lecturer, and such. And yeah, we just kind of broke down a lot of the characters in Andor and kind of figure out what makes them tick, why do they rebel, what is their role in rebellion. Kind of talked about all our favorites.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
biggest thing
so
I remember from that panel was sitting there like halfway through. I was like, I would take a whole class on this straight up, like just the psychology of the characters in Andor, because there's so much to talk about there alone. So yeah, it was a ton of fun at Comic-Con. So yeah, Brian, you were gonna say something?
yeah, I didn't get to go to Comic-Con sadly, but I was just interested about your Andor panel because I think watching Andor, and we've talked about this on our Andor episode as well. But do you have any like political theorists on there? Because I think so much of Andor is very leftist and like radical left leaning for
Yeah.
Star Wars.
So this is kind of the second Andor panel I've done this year. Star Wars Celebration in London back in April. I also put on a panel about Andor. Similar topic. It was more the Andor, the Empire, and a history of resistance. And so we had a little more on the political theory side. We had a professor of global history specializing in resistance. We had Chris Kempshaw, who's the author of the History and Politics of Star Wars from Death Star to Democracy. book. We had a film critic that also does activism. We had, I'm trying to think of who else we had. We had a geography grad student, and so most of those were from the UK, and so they brought a lot of their British politics into it. And it was really cool. So we recorded that as an episode of Star Warsologies. We also recorded the Comic-Con episode or Comic-Con panel as an episode for Star Warsologies. So those are both available to listen to. So yeah, have at it, Brian.
Yes, I will definitely give it a listen after this.
Yeah.
I'm gonna listen to the UK one because the one at Comic-Con was really good.
Right.
Yeah.
You mentioned Star Warsologies. Would you want to talk more about that? I assume some people are familiar with the podcast, but just for those who aren't in the know, I guess.
Sure. Star Warsologies is a podcast hosted by me and my friend Melissa Miller. She's a science communicator. She also writes for Star Wars Insider magazine. Basically, we just had the idea to have a podcast where we talk science and Star Wars, or some field of study and Star Wars, and like where they intersect, how it plays out in the real world, how it plays out in Star Wars. So we've covered topics from like geology and psychology to dance, and do our convention panels as well. So yeah, it's a wide variety of fields, and so each episode we bring on one guest expert to talk about their field and how it connects with Star Wars. And so we kind of do some deep dives into whatever connection there is, whether it is seeing that profession in Star Wars or seeing how, like if we, how the physics or the science that we see presented in Star Wars, how would that really work? Seeing how things are, or how does this influence the real world? We had an episode on holograms, and the Princess Leia hologram basically set the world's definition for what a hologram was. That before it was just like that little rainbow shimmery thing that you'd look at and you'd see it in 3D, and then Princess Leia said, "Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi, your only hope," and then everybody was like, "No, that's what a hologram is now." So we started during the pandemic. We have about 40 episodes now that we usually try and do one a month. We do it a little bit more frequently than that. And then when we have convention panels, those usually add on a few more each year. Star Wars Celebration, and also San Diego Comic-Con, and sometimes a few other conventions that we happen to be doing panels at.
Yeah, and you also mentioned that you were a writer for Star Wars Insider magazine, and you've also written for like StarWars.com. Like, how did you like get into that? Because that just seems really interesting, really cool. Like getting like your name out there.
Yeah, it is really cool. Yeah, I really enjoy it. No, I just started off writing for I was in a Star Wars club, and they had a blog that mostly did Star Wars news, and so I would post news articles and such. And then I started when the Clone Wars cartoon came out, I started posting reviews of episodes, and that kind of connected me to another friend who was looking for someone to review Star Wars comics on his site. He ran a general geek news site, so I started doing comics reviews for each issue coming out. And then all this time I've been kind of making friends at within fandom, and going to Comic-Con and celebrations. I met people that worked at Lucasfilm and such. And I basically asked one day, it's like, "Hey, can I write an article for you guys at StarWars.com?" And they're like, "Sure." And then they went with it. And then they were like, "Can I write another one?" And they're sure. And then, they kind of hired me on as a freelancer. And I did that for a couple of years. And then, did basically the same thing. Asked the editor at Star Wars Insider magazine. It's like, "Hey, can I write for you guys?" And I pitched out a couple ideas of things I wanted to do, and they went for it. And so I've been doing stuff for them as well.
That's so
Cool.
cool. I'm thinking
Yeah,
about
that's
now,
really
like
cool.
it's probably very likely that like 9, 10-year-old me probably read something that you wrote for StarWars.com, because when the Clone Wars was coming out, I was thinking, oh my, I need to like squeeze as much content out of this as I can. So I didn't even know StarWars.com existed. I just went on the internet and typed StarWars.com hoping something would come up, and it did. And I just spent a lot of time on that website as the Clone Wars was coming out. So this is really cool now
Yeah.
that I'm meeting someone who wrote for that.
Yeah, a lot of the stuff I wrote for StarWars.com, kind of in my early days, there was a lot of the book-related news and interviews. So that a new book would be coming out, I'd interview the author and kind of get the scoop on the making of the book, or the book would come out, and then I would interview the author about, hey, what's going on in the book? What is the motivation behind this character? Are there any Easter eggs? All kinds of things. So that was kind of where I started with that, and then kind of moved to more general stuff as well.
Yeah, I think
I
there's a
think I may
very good
have
chance
read,
that I read your book ones
yeah,
probably, because I read basically all the book ones on StarWars.com whenever
Mhm.
a new book comes out. So that's super cool.
yeah. And then we've had a Fandom Menace episode on our podcast
Mhm.
a couple months ago. And then I think because we're all like newer fans who like didn't grow up when episodes 4 through 6 were coming out. But as a fan who's been in the fandom for so long, like how have you seen like the evolution of the fandom, and like how the public's responses change as the prequels are coming out, and then the sequels, and then the post sequels era?
That's a really good question. Yeah, fandom really, was kind of people doing their own thing for, in the 80s, and into the 90s, when new figures started coming out in the late 90s. I think the collecting clubs started up then, and certainly like the collectors groups started forming, and like, hey, how do we find these new figures that are hard to find that are coming out? And there were people that were forming groups, like they would just be reading the expanded universe books and talking online. I think the internet really made it easier for people to connect kind of within their own sub fandom. So it's not only finding fans in your area geographically, but also kind of in your niche, that is like, oh, I'm a collector, oh, I'm a costumer, oh, I write fanfic, I write uh you know other things, I do gaming, and I read books and comics, and so there's a lot of building up in those areas. And obviously people have multiple interests, and so it crossed over. The Like the 501st Legion started in the late 90s, I believe. Basically one guy wanted to make his own stormtrooper armor, and he kind of put himself out there, and other people kept asking him how, and they decided to make a club that would do charity work. And then there was groups like the Force.net, which kind of served as a big central hub for a lot of Star Wars discussions, either in specific topics or geographic areas. And so it was like they would make fan force chapters. So like San Diego, I was part of the San Diego fan force chapter for many years, and other areas would have their own fan force chapters all around the world, that either by city or by country or whatnot. One of the ways I got into the Star Wars fandom first was actually the old Star Wars customizable card game that came out from Decipher in the mid 90s. This is like when Magic came out, and so it was a really fun game, and I started connect to Star Wars fans, and that's how I started going to Comic Con. And Comic Con back then, there wasn't a whole lot of Star Wars content, because the prequels hadn't come out yet, or weren't gearing up for that. So it was like, trying to think, like they'd have an autograph area where you could get like Jeremy Bullock's autograph for like $20, or Phil Brown, who played the original Uncle Owen, for like $10. And it was like the Men Behind the Masks tour. And but eventually, Lucasfilm started presenting there. I think they started gearing up with the Shadows of the Empire campaign. And then when the prequels came out, fandom really, got kicked up a notch, that there was all these people excited. A new generation was growing up with these ones. And so they were seeing Star Wars, from their point of view, with their own story going into it. and yeah, so that's, lots of clubs kind of were popping up everywhere, and different groups, and certainly with the internet, people started blogs and different fan sites that would focus on, hey, here's Star Wars news, here's our crazy theories about this, or here's our handmaiden appreciation page, and just all kinds of things. And then after that, we fandom was still going, and then it's like, oh hey, Star Wars is going to keep going, we have the Clone Wars now, and so that kind of became another generational lead in, that like there's the prequel era people who grew up that, and then the people who grew up in the Clone Wars, and it's like Ahsoka is their jam, and I mean Ahsoka is everybody's jam because she's so awesome. And it just kind of kept building, and I don't know. Yeah. So I think it's a lot different now, because now, Star Wars is so mainstream, that geekdom is so kind of mainstream, that you know, I don't want to say like when you're in the 80s and you said you were a Star Wars fan, you'd get beat up, but certainly it was not something that you'd really say in public, that you like you'd have to feel people out to make sure, like, oh, I think they're cool, I can tell them that I'm a Star Wars fan. I got really into it back in the 90s when the first expanded universe came out, the Heir to the Empire by Tim Zahn, and some of the early Dark Horse comics as well. And then it is what it is now, that we have Star Wars, official Star Wars celebrations. Those kind of also helped leading fandom. The first one was when Phantom Menace came out, and they've been doing them every 2 or 3 years since, and it's just been a big party. Celebration is so amazing that if you guys get a chance to go, do go, because it's like a big Comic-Con or something, except everybody there is there for one thing, and so you have an immediate connection with every person out there, that you can just go up and start talking about whatever, and then you just find out, like, oh hey, they're into costuming, cool, or oh hey, they like the High Republic, cool. And so and you find, like, if you're waiting for panels, you're like, oh, I keep seeing the same person in the panels I want to go to, I bet they're into the same things. And I've met some people that way, like back at Celebration too, and we became really good friends. And same thing, and it's like then they introduced me to their friends, and so it's just like your family, your community is just getting bigger and bigger, and you get kind of drawn into a big thing. And so right now, Celebration and Comic-Con, they're, for me, all about seeing friends that I made through Star Wars. And yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, that's super
that
cool just
sounds
to get
really
the history of that, because I think I can probably speak for all of us, where it's like when we got into Star Wars, it was pretty much already mainstream. We've known Star Wars as a mainstream thing, like the whole time we've known Star Wars, right? Because I'm guessing we all got into it like early 2010s ish, right? Just around that time frame. So it's honestly weird to think about a time when Star Wars wasn't like that, but that's really cool just to get the history of like how it sort of played out,
Yeah,
I think.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it's just weird to think about it that way, because I remember I got into the Clone Wars, I think about like halfway through season 1 when it was airing, and so like I got into it, and then I like my best friend told me that he was into it, and then like we like realized, oh, a bunch of other kids in our class are all into this show, and we started role playing episodes of Star Wars. So it was like it was a totally normal thing to be into, that everyone I knew was into. So it's just hard to imagine like when I got into anime, I got into it when it was like kind of a thing that you don't say like you're into anime, so I kind of understand that in that way. But like for Star Wars, no, it was always totally cool to say that you were into Star Wars, so it's just weird to me to think about that, like you couldn't say in public that you were into Star Wars.
Yeah, and it was a different era, and Star Wars, Star Trek, other sci-fi and fantasy stuff that was generally kind of you had to keep it on the down low, that and unless you found people that were, you're like, oh, this is my tribe, that I can stand here and make Star Wars references all day with, and stuff,
And they'll understand the reference.
yeah, and then like, oh hey, let's go do things as fans, like be like, oh yeah, that there's a convention, like a Star Trek convention, or a Comic-Con or something like that, that you can go be a geek and not have to hide.
Yeah, and I think that's also just speaks to like I think the core message of Star Wars too, like family and found family. And I think that's just so great that like us as fans can find that in real life as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
For
I
you
guess that's also,
guys, oh, for you guys, how many of like your parents were also into Star Wars? They were pivotal in introducing you to it.
When I was 8 years old, my dad called me down from my room and said, "Sit down, we're watching A New Hope." And that was that.
Yeah, it wasn't really my parents for me because my mom had seen the prequels, but she was more like just a casual fan, not someone who was like super into it. So I got into it through like the Lego Star Wars game, just sort of on my own. So
My parents were sort of into Star Trek, but for some reason, literally nobody I know knew about Star Wars, like introduced me to Star Wars. But like one day when I was 10, I decided, hey, I am gonna make Star Wars my personality, and ever since then it's stuck, I guess.
it's amazing.
yeah. My dad watched A New Hope when it came out with his dad, but he's also just like a casual fan. So I guess, but we had episode two on DVD and just episode two on DVD, by the way, when I was a kid. So I only watched episode two as a kid,
I can't
Wow.
like
imagine only
over and
having
over
episode
again.
2. It's my least
I'm
favorite
like,
of the prequels. Like,
but see, like that's what I grew up with, so it's just very nostalgic for me.
That's
Like
a fair
especially the
point.
whole
Yeah.
like Sam Wessel like Coruscant chase, like that whole sequence is really nostalgic for me. And so I watched that like a ton of times. And then like when Clone Wars came out and like Lego Star Wars and stuff, like all that just compounded.
Yeah, I think that, definitely one thing that helped, Lego Star Wars, the video games are awesome. That
Yeah.
and then the cartoons that they made with it, that was kind of my daughter's gateway into Star Wars is like, just the Freemaker Adventures, Yoda
Oh my
Chronicles.
God,
yeah,
Those are
yeah.
yeah.
amazing. Yeah.
That
It's
I
so
love
long.
those. I was like one of the few people that when the first one came out, the Padawan Menace, did a review and I connected with the showrunner, and so I've been kind of one of the big cheerleaders for Lego Star Wars content. But yeah, the late '90s is like when they started bringing merchandise back. It had just been a desert since like after Return of the Jedi, and then it was like, okay, we start and get more figures and getting shirts and stuff, and now it's like every single thing you can think of. There's a Star Wars thing. I have a Star Wars Instant Pot, and yeah, but my sister got it for me. It looks like R2D2, of course.
I have an
That's cool.
R2D2 pizza cutter that beeps when you press on it.
Yes.
Yeah, and then I think just connecting Star Wars and real life, and then back to your podcast, James, like having this experience talking to these experts that are experts in their field, and them talking about how their fields connect to Star Wars, like has that made you like engage with the content differently or like more critically, or has it changed how you view it at all?
That's a good question. Yeah, working on Star Warsologies. I mean, part of it was like I wanted to do this because I wanted to like just know more and geek out about science. That's another thing I like nerding out about is science and history and kind of all subjects. And so yeah, it was like, okay, how would the geology of Tatooine work, or how would the ecology on this planet work, or you know is being attached to the Jedi code really psychologically healthy for you? All these kind of questions that you think about and you just start analyzing, and it's like, well, let's get somebody who knows what they're talking about and have them break it down for us. That one of my favorite episodes that we did was with a guy who develops prosthetics, and he actually got into prosthetics because of Luke's bionic hand in Empire Strikes Back. And that was a world that I really knew nothing about, and it was just really cool to learn all this stuff about real world prosthetics and how the different things in Star Wars, Luke's bionic hand or Vader's suit or Grievous's uh, you know exoskeleton, how those all might work and such. That so it's like, yeah, it's cool. I like learning about things. I hope that other people enjoy learning about things, listening to Star Warsologies. Yeah, we are always looking for guest experts that we can talk about. pretty much any field. Like we started off mostly with science, but we've kind of branched out to any field of knowledge that where somebody has expertise and can help us see Star Wars through their lens.
So one thing I'm sort of curious about as a follow-up is like, if you think about like maybe the science of like a particular like a planet or a creature within Star Wars, and you see something that's portrayed like just really accurately, like I'm guessing just seeing a lot of those things over time through different movies, different shows, it's just got to increase your appreciation, I guess, for the content, right? If they're trying to be accurate to the real world science in such a way, does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, that they show that they're doing their homework, going
Yeah.
in depth. Yeah, one of our guests was Tara Whitlatch, she was the creature designer for episode 1. So all those beautiful animals you see on Naboo, she designed out, and her background was in doing animal drawings and like figuring out their musculature, and so figuring out like their anatomy on the inside, so how they would work as an actual animal. Rather than just simply saying, hey, let's draw a couple squiggly lines and put eyes on it. So yeah, it was, again, that attention to detail. Certainly there's other things that is like, yeah, okay, how does a Death Star really work? That what is like the energy amount required to blow up a planet. And that's something that we talked about on our Science of Return of the Jedi episode that we did at Celebration Europe. So you go back and listen to that, and you can get really deep into how the Death Star might work and how lightsabers might work, which is really cool. Yeah, so it's neat looking at where it really shines, and it's also neat poking out like, oh, hey, this is where it doesn't work. This is how it would work in real life. This is what it would take to make it work like we see it in Star Wars.
Yeah, that seems
Yeah, and then
cool. Sorry, go ahead,
yeah, I
Brian.
mean, I was just gonna say that like I feel like the classic thing with Star Wars and science is people always feel like, oh, like there shouldn't be sounds in space, there shouldn't be explosions in
Yeah.
space, and like the TIE fighter shouldn't sound like that, or like blah 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 blah, or like that thing in like I think it was like Last Jedi when
Yeah,
like
the
the First
bombers
Order
with the
was
gravity and
firing,
stuff. Yeah,
and
I've
like
seen
there's no
so many things
gravity in
online
space.
about that, and I'm like, there's a
That
balance you got to
episode,
strike with like it's Star Wars, it's a fictional universe, but also like you want it to be somewhat realistic, right? It's a tricky balance always.
Yeah.
I just want a science fiction piece of media to follow the rules of basic physics.
If you want something like that, The Expanse is where you should go.
My dad watches that and he keeps telling me to watch it, and it's on my
Yeah.
list.
No, definitely. Yeah, The Expanse did a really good job of following like actual travel time in the solar system and the way that weapons would work in space and such. Yeah, but anyway, what was I talking about? Well, yeah, there's always the people that are like the easy thing, yeah, like sounds in space, but yeah, it's making it relatable, making it's a galaxy far, far away. Physics could work differently there.
yeah,
But when you think about it, and somebody related it this way, that basically what George Lucas was making as his concept for Star Wars is that I think he said later on to the people that were slowly doing more and more of it, was that everything has to be able to be understood by somebody living in the 1940s. That it doesn't have to be technology that they have then, but it's something they could get. That some so having spaceships and laser swords, but not necessarily things like we have now of like pop-up ads. Like I don't think people would have gotten that back then. So that kind of level of things, and so having bombers totally makes sense in Star Wars, and it looks cool.
yeah.
There's always that it should look cool, and it fits the plot.
Yeah, I've watched like parts of Star Wars with people who have like never touched Star Wars at all. Like I tend to watch the Clone Wars with people who have like never seen Star Wars, and they'll ask me something about like why did they do that? That's not how that would work. And I'm like, it looks cool. Like I always answer from the perspective of like someone making it and not like in universe, because like there's no way to explain it in universe. It just looks cool. And a lot of people aren't satisfied with that. And
yeah, and there are people who try and figure out the in-universe stuff, and sometimes you can do that, and sometimes it takes a lot of mental gymnastics to get through it, and then something else will contradict it, and you have to spackle it all over. I used to be really deep into kind of that type of continuity stuff, and then later on, I just realized is like, why do we need stories to patch these two things together that didn't quite match up? Let's have stories that are bigger than that are cooler. And if things don't always line up, that's okay. These are stories, they're myths, like the way that myths of from other cultures, the characters don't always line up from myth to myth because different people are telling them.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's a
and
super
then
cool take on Star Wars.
yeah, because like also I think going away from like the hard sciences in Star Wars, like the humanities and like I was looking at your list of episodes earlier that you had an episode on indigenous peoples in Star
Mhm.
Wars. And I think stuff like that too is also so cool that Star Wars is now such a huge thing with like hundreds of authors like contributing to the universe of Star Wars. Then like everyone can like have their own perspective on what's going on. And I think something like that is super cool, especially with like indigenous people, because when you think about it, like the stuff like with like the Tusken Raiders and like Tatooine, like and then how how like the prequels kind of like portrayed them and like the original trilogy,
Mhm.
and then going into like the Book of Boba Fett and how they were treated there was something really cool to see.
Yeah, absolutely. That finding ways that as our culture has shifted to understand and include more people and have more people represented in the stories we tell, that just opens up more dimensions for really cool storytelling and less reliance on just tropes and stereotypes. So I think it's really cool that we have as many people in the writing rooms, as many people on the sets and stuff, and yeah, that representation matters, and that's something that's really important to me.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
then sort of working off that, I guess another field, I'm not sure if this has been discussed too much on your podcast. I haven't seen an episode on this specifically, but like the political side of like Star Wars, like way back when, if we're talking
Mhm.
about like Return of the Jedi alone, or even just episodes 4, 5, 6 alone, like George Lucas very much intended them to be political in a certain sense, right? But then
Mhm.
if you look at the fandom nowadays, they'll complain when something is remotely political. Because if we look at like, the Senate scenes, all the politics on Coruscant and the
Mhm.
prequels, you know, initially, at least from what I've seen, the fandom sort of complained about like the taxation of trade routes being a plot point, those kinds of things, right? And then nowadays people want more politics, but they don't want it to go too far into politics. It's a very tricky balance, and I think that Star Wars has always just been political, at least from what I've seen. So I don't really
Mhm.
get a lot of those complaints.
Yeah, and I think part of that is the people who complain about it now, they maybe didn't see it as political because they were younger then they didn't see things through a political lens. But definitely, when George Lucas was making these movies, there was a lot, that he was trying to say politically, that the United States had just come out of the Vietnam War, and we see echoes of that in the films. Certainly looking at the Battle of Endor and how the Empire versus the Ewoks works. And so there's always been political messages in there, and certainly like what Anakin says. Well, somebody should make them all agree. And so looking at the nature of democracy versus authoritarianism, and seeing that. And then working towards the sequels, and certainly there was a lot of people there that didn't like the politics. I think people will say it's too political if it's something they disagree with. If people agree with it,
Yeah.
they're not going to say anything.
Mhm.
And so, um, and I think that speaks to kind of a reactionary thing that there's some people that want their Star Wars to be what it was when they were a kid, and not necessarily realize that, hey, it's grown and changed the same way that the rest of society has. And yeah, that there's always been politics built in, and even just at like things more aimed at kids, that there's basic lessons about good and evil, and the power of working together and including people, And some people see that as, oh yeah, that's just natural, and other people say, hey, you're trying to push some agenda on us, or you're accepting all people or whatnot. Yeah, so again, I think it's the people who want to raise a stink about it, and certainly there's a lot of voices that do that because then they get more likes or more views or whatever. So it's our media culture that whoever makes the most noise gets paid. So
Yeah, and then I think Siddhant and Anish had some discussions perhaps about science, kind of akin to your podcast. So, Siddhant, do you want to start us off with cloning, which I think
Yeah.
James has also covered on his podcast?
All right, so I am gonna basically give everyone a brief overview of biology in, I want to say 30 minutes, so have fun with that. So I guess most people remember the line from episode 2, 200,000 units are ready with a million more on the way. And I want to say a unit assumes unit's referring to a clone, because if you're referring to a platoon or a squadron, that kind of doesn't make much sense. So if you use that logic, that means the Grand Army of the Republic has 1.2 million soldiers. And if you just like do some Earth comparisons, so for if the Grand Army of the Republic was an army on Earth, it would be the 14th largest military between Ukraine and Indonesia. And yeah, I guess you could always say there in the Clone Wars in the books, you see a bunch of Twi'leks and other non-clones fighting against the Separatists, but realistically, it's not going to be more than 1 million. And and even in the Thrawn novel, I believe early on when Thrawn and Eli are in the academy on Coruscant, there's something about most Republic citizens only believing that the war was mainly fought by clones against droids. So it implies that in popular consciousness, it was only the army was mainly built out by clones, maybe some human volunteers like whatever Tarkin's supposed to be. I think he's from the Naval Academy or something like that, and the Jedi, of course. And that makes sense because eventually Imperial bigotry was against aliens because they assumed, hey, all of us were humans against the aliens, like the droids, the Nemoidians, and all of them else. So that makes sense. But this does not make sense whatsoever if you try to justify the 1.2 million, because that means planets need to be incredibly small compared to the Earth. So most planets should be around as big as Mercury or maybe even Mars to justify that level of army. So if you're a military expert, please contact me and try to justify this. But otherwise, I don't understand how that makes any sense.
yeah, when you think of the galaxy as having thousands of planets, so if you divide that 1.2 million by 2,000, how many clones per planet are you going to get? It's not a lot. I mean, even if you're not fighting on all of the planets, of course. But yeah, the 1.2 million, honestly, yeah, this is one of those things that I think they put in and didn't think about it too much. And, we can either try and wiggle our way around it or just say, you know what, they were wrong.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
that's something
mean,
I've thought
and
about for a while. I've tried to rationalize something in my head, like, oh, maybe the 1 million was just clones in training. There were some cadets that they had to accelerate. Like, I have no idea. I thought of some stuff in my head for it, but it seems small, especially if you think about like there were probably more than the usual number of clones on a planet on Coruscant, right? Because they had the Coruscant Guard, they had the Temple and those things. There were so many like the medical stations they had set up in the Clone Wars on just random asteroids and those things. So they would have stations set up ships that aren't on planets. So only a subset of the 1.2 million would be on a planet at any given time, right? So it becomes even smaller when you think about that. So
The only sense of world building I can see that can attempt to justify it is because the Galactic Army was so taxed that you need to push Jedi to even further and further, that eventually Palpatine's rise was just unchecked and went on unnoticed. So that's like a form of world building. If any Star Wars authors want to use that in the future, hey, I'm not going to sue you.
Well, definitely the Republic Commando books by Karen Travis and the old legends definitely dealt with a lot of the clone trooper Jedi dynamics and figuring and trying to make sense of that 1.2 million, and basically say that, oh hey, later on they're like, wait a minute, we did the math. Where are these extra clones coming from? There's something going on here because they're not coming from Kamino.
I just remembered that plot point. I read those books like 5 years ago. That just rang a bell to me.
Yeah. That who are these clones that they don't seem to get any of our references to growing up on Kamino? Where are they coming from? And who's giving them the orders?
I mean, wasn't
That
it
is
confirmed in like
interesting.
other pieces of media that like the Kaminoans had other facilities like off planet, so they made them somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, there's Wayland in the Bad Batch, which I don't know if that was an active facility during the Clone Wars era. I don't think that's been
Yeah.
established, but yeah.
All right. So let's move on to medicine. Medicine actually. So we don't have a really accurate image of medicine and how accessible it is in the Star Wars universe, but let's just talk about some transplants in our real world. So if you wanted to get anything transplanted, the best thing, I know this is weird, but just hear me out. The best person to donate anything to you is your sibling. And most times it's not possible, but you can get non-perfect transplant organs from people, from donors or who are your parents or other distant relatives. And these organs contain antigens, which are just bits of themselves, which can be detected by a donor's antibodies. And once an antibody detects that, that can result in the body's immune system attacking that organ. So over time, antibody producing cells can cause mutations in antibodies, which eventually can cause antibodies to detect that donor organ and then can attack with the immune system, causing immune responses, which aren't the best. So the Phasma novel reveals that cancer essentially doesn't exist in the Star Wars universe.
Oh, I
I
don't
think
remember
I don't remember
that.
that either. Wait.
so. Do you remember the radiation testing site?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, they
So
were on the planet. Yeah. Okay.
So somebody was affected by radiation, and one of the droids said, "Hey, that's fine. We can just heal you." I think it's um the one who survives from Phasma's tribe and her kid.
Mhm.
I think you're right. That was her name was Civ, right?
Yeah, I think it
Yeah,
was her.
okay.
I read Phasma like 6 months ago and bad with names.
Okay.
Oh, I read
So
it like pre-COVID.
jeez. So one of the droids says that, okay, you essentially have Star Wars cancer, but we can treat that. So, and it's a perfect treatment. It's not like the cancer treatment we have now, which is surgery, immunotherapy, chemotherapy,
Mhm.
which are non-perfect because they are like, you're not going to always eliminate 100% of cancer, but
Right.
somehow we can clear all of that in Star Wars somehow.
I mean, in Star Wars, what I've just assumed is like we have Bacta in Star Wars, right?
Mhm.
That
Yeah.
is just like an all-in-one, you're cured with Bacta. That's sort of the extent that I thought
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah.
So, because like in books and shows, if someone's injured, if someone has pretty much like any form of injury, no matter how different it is, just spend a day in a Bacta tank, or in Mando, we see just like a Bacta spray, right?
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
and then yeah, in the High Republic, like Bacta is a source of like it's being discovered and it's being talked about like it's going to just revolutionize the state of medicine in Star Wars. That's the extent to which I've really thought about it, but that is interesting to know.
Yeah, I mean, I believe the crash ship was sometime during the Clone Wars era, if I'm not wrong. So that means at that time, medical science has progressed to such an extent that it's either possible to detect all cancer-causing mutations in a human system or a system, and then eliminate all cells with those mutations, which is beyond specific immunotherapy. And I don't think that's even possible, even with the presence of Bacta. Or what's more likely, someone's developed a marker which can detect all tumor cells. And then there's a specific form of genetically modified immunotherapy or tumor-specific chemotherapy, which only attacks these marked cells, which seems somewhat more logistically possible, but maybe Bacta is just a cure-all. Who knows?
Yeah, Bacta's never been explained, so I don't know.
Well, I mean, the other thing to think about is that one big difference between our galaxy and the galaxy far, far away is there's the force that the living things create the force, and so maybe just cancer isn't as much of a problem because the force doesn't like it. that it's a perversion of the force that having these cells that are kind of out of control. As for in terms of having the medical know-how and technology to cure cancer, yeah, it's just, I think just one of those things that it's like, oh, we didn't really understand when they mapped out the universe. Is like, oh yeah, we have these things. It's like we're again going for the cool factors. It's like we have miracle cure Bacta. It's like we have bionic limbs and replacement. But yeah, it's like now we're moving kind of past prosthetics to like, hey, we can use stem cells to try and maybe regrow an organ, or use 3D molecular printing, or who knows what the next technology is.
Yeah. I guess it's always weird that Star Wars always seems to rely on prosthetics or like artificial replacements,
Mhm.
because even in our regular life, prosthetics aren't like the best, because most of them, if you take a limb prosthetic, for example, it's or a joint replacement. Most of it is made out of a form of metal, usually titanium, if I'm not wrong. It eventually, after wear and tear, it is going to start to get damaged, and you're going to have to get it replaced. Otherwise, you should get some form of metallic poisoning. And that's strange that why Star Wars has relied upon that, because with Bacta, why wouldn't you just regrow your limb? Why risk um, giving someone a prosthetic presumably made of metal or something and risk of further infections? Because you're not giving prosthetics to 60 or 70-year-olds, like people who are unlikely to cause more exercise-related damage. You're giving it to people like Anakin, a 20-year-old who has thirst for death. He is going to destroy that arm within a few days. And yeah, it's kind of weird that Star Wars has relied on prosthetics, if anything.
I
Well,
think for like Star Wars from like a realism point of view, the prosthetic thing doesn't make any sense, especially since they regrew like a Zilla Beast from like what, like a part of its armor. Like, isn't that
Mm,
what Palpatine did? Which is like
Yeah.
kind of
yeah.
crazy. But for me personally, I feel like the reliance on prosthetics is more of like a story thing, more than
Mhm.
like a realism point of view, as like they're being taken like being more robot than human, especially with like Luke and Anakin and like Vader and like Grievous and stuff. But definitely from like the scientific point of view, yeah, it like makes no sense. And also with like the cancer thing too, I think also I feel like with the precision of medical technology that the Kaminoans have, like when they got the inhibitor chip removed,
Mhm.
I think it is within reason that they have some super specific targeting of like cells or mutations, or like they've managed some way to, yeah, like get rid of specific mutations in like DNA or something.
I think Brian, kind of nailed it there by saying, from a story, it's the storytelling point of view that yeah, it's like, Vader is no more machine than man. It's about losing your humanity, and being replaced with artificialness, and what that means from a standpoint of the storytelling. That when you look at Vader cutting off Luke's sword hand, it's like there's some deeper symbolism there. Um, that it's basically kind of like a castration in a sense, that from the storytelling. But yeah, so getting an artificial one, it's like he's lost a little bit of his own humanity, and then we later see that in Return of the Jedi. It's like, oh, Vader is also has no human limb there. Um, yeah, so I think it makes more sense, again, like Brian says, from the storytelling than from a medical sense. That and other sci-fi properties also have that issue too, because it's like it made sense when the show was first created, but our medicine has jumped by leaps and bounds, and so it's like, yeah, why have Picard with an artificial heart when they could just grow a new one for him, use the replicator.
Yep. Anish, you want to take one of your spiels into cybersecurity before we move on to the next one?
Yeah, so real quick, actually, one thing I just remembered as we were talking about like the Phasma topic about the presence of just the radiation stuff in Star Wars, one thing that came to mind is in two of the Star Wars books, I think Bloodline and Rebel Rising, there is a disease called bloodburn, which occurs if you spend too much time in space, which is interesting because that's never really been addressed in Star Wars because there are two characters, both of them are pilots. One of them is a pilot for the New Republic in Bloodline, and she spends so much time doing racing in space, doing different things for the New Republic, and she's ultimately given this diagnosis. And she either, she can be grounded or she can continue to fly in space and just do that. And then in Rebel Rising, I believe it was sort of a younger kid, sort of a teen that I think Jin met this dude at some point. He was also sort of grounded by his mom because, at risk of bloodburn, too much time in space. And that's something that I feel like is really interesting because so many characters like spend so much time in space. Like the amount of hours Han is clocked on the Falcon just flying around is probably ridiculous, right? And like just in general, like people on Star Destroyers, on just all sorts of ships in space.
Yeah.
Like I'm not quite sure what causes that. I think the book might have had some specifics that I don't recall off the top of my head, but just the gravity differences, air differences in space versus being on a planet. I don't know exactly, but that was something I wanted to bring up in case any of y'all had anything more to say.
I think
think
things like that just tend to come from like how someone didn't come up with it earlier in Star Wars, and then as someone's writing a new book or whatever piece of media, they think, oh, this would be cool. And they just have to like insert it in there and like hope that no one complains about how it wasn't a thing before because this is the first person to come up with it. And like I said before, with having to explain, like it just looks cool to people who I'm watching the Clone Wars with. I'll have people ask me stuff like, why is this a thing and wasn't a thing before? And it's like nobody came up with it. Like it's just a new idea that someone had and they had to find a way to insert it into Star Wars. So like I'm one of the like I am one of those people that tries to make it make sense in universe in my head, but also like I do have to recognize that from a creation standpoint, like that's just
So
how
much,
it goes
yeah.
sometimes.
Like so much of Star Wars is like made for convenience. Because like it's like
Yeah.
especially with like the world between worlds, I feel like when that was revealed that Ezra just pulled Ahsoka out of there,
Yeah.
I
It's opened
think
a
even I
huge can of
remember like I was
worms.
in like yeah, like I was in like eighth grade or like seventh grade or something when like that came out. And then like even the online circles I was in then but were like, oh, well, why didn't he do that when blah 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 blah. So
I
yeah, like so
saw a
much of Star
post
Wars.
at some point where someone was like saying, "Oh, Filoni probably like killed his favorite character and regretted it, so he invented time travel to bring her back."
Yeah. And oh, and then also like all the memes when like oh God, when Rise of Skywalker came out and like Ben healed Rey and then like people were making and then like Rey healed like the worm thing and people were making all those memes about like Qui-Gon like being mad or whatever. I mean, I feel like that was just for the story. Like, that was just for plot convenience at that point.
Yeah, I mean, like force healing was definitely a thing, you know, in earlier books and comics and video games, especially that you could draw on the force to heal yourself as a game mechanic mostly. But yeah, new things are being come up with, but you can look at it from the point of view as the Jedi didn't know everything that even though they've been around for thousands of years, they didn't know everything, or maybe they did know and lost that institutional knowledge. Yeah, so that's all I got.
Yeah. All right. And then I guess I can talk about one of the cybersecurity topics I want to talk about. So I'm majoring in CS at UCSD. So one thing I thought was interesting is that this didn't really bug me when watching Rogue One, but in retrospect, it kind of does. So the Empire security for the Death Star plans is really garbage on Scarif for a couple reasons. So first off, there's a scene where Jin, Cassian, and K2 go to the data vault. There's like one dude standing there who's like, "Can I help you?" And then K2 knocks him out, right? All you need to get into the door is that dude's handprint, right? And in general, just as like a cybersecurity thing, just from the stuff I've studied. But also just like more generally in society, like you need multiple levels of authentication for these kinds of things, right? Like in general, like what I would have done in that case has been like you need that guy's fingerprint and then also like maybe a password that only he knows, right? Or maybe it's like a retinal scan and then like he has like a physical card or something you got to swipe. So like it's always two levels of authentication, right? Like it's like you using like a retinal scan and like a fingerprint scan is pretty pointless. You just need one of them because they're both like something that you physically are, right? So like having a retinal scan combined with maybe a password that only that guy would know, that would have been a better level of security. But no, it's straight up just that dude puts his hand on the thing and boom, they're inside. So that's part one. Part two is the master switch. Literally anybody can press that. It's just right there out in the open, right? So it's on a random panel just out there. There was no like, scan here to prove you're an Imperial or like, some secret passkey that only they don't know. Anybody can pull that switch at any point, right? So there's that. There's the bit where Bodhi connects to the comm tower, right? And again, there's no authentication. He plugs in a cable and he can instantly make transmissions, right? At least a
Oh yeah.
at least a very basic check of like, what's your employee ID number as a stormtrooper? I don't know, just something like that, right? Just to make sure you're actually an Imperial, right? So, though, I mean, I get it because that just introduces a whole level of complexity to the plot that you don't want to worry about. It would just drag out the sequence longer and also like make it a bit weird. But also like thinking about it from the angle of cybersecurity, if the Empire is like just like a company trying to manage a particular asset or keep it secure, like that's not what you would do. And it ties into a quote from Andor that I thought of when he's talking to Luthen in episode 3, where he's like, they can't even imagine it. They're so fat and satisfied. I can do whatever I want, walk in and steal something from the Empire. And it's just beyond them to imagine that something could even occur. They would never have imagined that someone would get down to Scarif. So they just became complacent, is what I think.
No,
Yeah,
totally agree.
I think that is the best way to explain it if you're trying to like make it make sense in universe is that they probably never imagined that they could like figure out a way to get the barrier over the planet open at all. So like how could they even get into the planet and then like how would they possibly get to the top, even if they got down there, how would they possibly get to the top of the tower? Like they think that they have multiple levels of security that they couldn't possibly get through, but we see them get through all of them one at a time, and then when they finally get to the tower, there's no two-factor authentication to
Yeah.
access the information.
There's no duo push.
No,
The
there's no
Empire
duo
needs
push.
duo push.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like at every single stage of the operation, there's a place where something could be improved. Like at the very top of the tower, when Jin has to reset the antenna, like that's all she has to do, and then plug it in, plans are transmitted. There's no level of like confirm here, who are you sending this to, why, what's your actual name, stuff like that, right? Like in the real world, that's what we would do. But again, it can be rationalized in universe. This is something where I can work it out in my head, like, okay, that makes sense why they wouldn't do that.
And then also, Anish, I think you had to think about like droids. But I think that's really interesting with like especially the conversations surrounding AI now. And I guess like I mean, have we seen like AI in Star Wars?
I mean, droids in general are pretty much all AI to
Like
that
our droids
extent.
AI?
Like, yeah, I mean, we haven't seen like Chat GPT style AI in Star Wars, but like we've just seen like full sentience like droids, right? So one thing I sort of wanted to talk about there was one thing that I've always found interesting is that droids are subservient in Star Wars to humans. Um, I've always thought that that's just weird because it feels like robots are the more advanced ones, right? Maybe they'd want to be the ones in control, the humans are the ones serving them, but it's always really been the opposite. And then we saw in Solo, L3 sort of wanted to push for droid equality, droid rights. That sort of ties into some of the EU books. Last Shot, a book that came out, I think, the same year as Solo, introduces a group called the Droid Gotra, which
Yeah.
basically has L3's mission, right? Droid equality through more violent means than L3. But yeah, so that's been interesting to me.
Yeah, no, it is kind of it's another way of exploring kind of just the humanity is like, yeah, how do we treat these droids that they do these things for us. They're more than, there's like different levels of droids. There's the ones that are basically walking toasters, like a power droid, but then there's the ones like C-3PO and R2-D2 who have complex personalities. And what does it mean that we can wipe their memory? Like, is that would essentially, if you did that to a person, that's a crime. So I think it's something that's like, oh, we have robots, and let's make the robots, human, and without necessarily, taking that to next logical steps of, okay, the robots are serving humans and our property, and humanity had something like that before, and it was a really bad idea. And you can see that L3 and the droid Gotra, however it's pronounced, are fighting for droid equality, droid rights. And so that's something that's always been interesting to me, the idea of robot sentience and what that means. And like even the battle droids, they're always good for a laugh, but you start listening to them and you realize like they have feelings that
Yeah.
they're ones is like, it's like, when R2-D2 has his like droid squad and he's got reprogrammed battle droids, and some of them choose to stay behind, and they say it's been an honor to serve with you. It's like this droid understands the concept of honor, and that's a really complex thing that you couldn't really program, and it really makes you feel bad for the battle droids essentially. I have this whole thing about battle droids. Because I think they're awesome, and Matthew Wood voicing them is awesome, and Roger from Freemaker Adventures is awesome.
Oh yeah.
Yes, my sweet sand cookies.
That's been back like 5 years just hearing that.
It's funny, like we start treating the droids more as human, but then the clones become more and more like droids, that they're replaceable, and then the Empire makes them even less human by like, okay, you don't even have names anymore, you're just numbers. So it is really complex, that the nature of droids and how they interact, and like you say, it's like, yeah, there could be droids just running everything, that why have ships with thousands of crewers? It's like you could just have lots of computers all working together, and they'd be a lot faster at firing weapons and targeting things. And and I think part of that for the battle droids angle is that the Neomodians are cowards and they fear a droid uprising, so they make the droids intentionally suck. That they just like, we're gonna make them have crappy aim and stuff, just so that it's like we have a droid control switch, but it's like if they get out of control, it's like we can beat them in a one-on-one fight.
I actually watched a YouTube video recently called The Battle Droids Deserved Better, where it was literally just a compilation of all like the battle droids like experiencing that type of experience. And there was one that like they pointed out where I forget which episode it was, but there was a scene where a battle droid is like, hold on, I almost got it, and they're trying to like destroy a escape pod or something, and he misses, and he goes, oh well, it's my programming. And I just like the thing you brought up about the Nemoidians or whoever like programming to suck, like I just that image immediately came up in my mind of like, oh well, if you're programmed to do a specific task, why can you just not do it? And then he is like self-aware enough to blame his programming. So it's just really interesting to think about, and like that whole video was really funny, just like seeing all of the like things like that the battle droids experience, and like honestly they did deserve better.
Dude, send me that link.
I'll try to find it again.
Yeah, in retrospect, you really do feel bad for the droids. Like, there's so many times in the Clone Wars where it's just played for a quick beat of comedy, where maybe they're on the bridge of a ship and they're like talking about, oh no, we've been left behind or whatever, and then it's like the clones come in and take them out. Like, there's that one bit, like I think one of the Cad Bane episodes where one of them's like, no, don't shoot me, shoot him. He's the commander, right? So like they have feelings like to that extent where they can like fear for their own lives, but then also be like, they can acknowledge who they are, which is like a really, really advanced place for a sentient being that is, I mean, well, they're a sentient in a certain sense, right? But they're portrayed, I think, at a bit of a lower level than like C-3PO and those droids, as like they're supposed to be a mindless army of machines, but also like they're probably as complex as C-3PO, like to that extent of like self-awareness, right? Does that make sense? Yeah, so I think that's really interesting. And then one thing I just brought up is that we have seen one example of like sort of like a droid dominated planet or group in Star Wars. There's a planet in the third book of the Alphabet Squadron trilogy, Victory's Price, where some of the main characters, some Imperials, they're all humans, have to go and like decode a data chip for some reason. And the planet they land on is entirely droid controlled. The humans are the servants, the humans are pretty much the workers of that planet. The droids run everything. They have like a big network that's interconnected between all the droids. So I believe when a shootout happens, pretty much all the droids are like a hive mind. They know exactly where it is, what's happening. And I don't know if that was Droid Gotcha related at all, or if it was just a droid planet. But I thought that was interesting, just the fact that a planet like that exists canonically.
Yeah, I think there were other planets in in Legends. I want to say Mechas 3. I forget where that came from, but that just popped in my head, that total droid population. And maybe that's why the civilization is like, we cannot let the droids get control, because we saw Terminator 2. We know where that goes.
Yeah, and then sort of on the note of droids control, one more thing I just recalled from the same book I mentioned last shot is like the main villain is a dude who he's from Utapau, so he's that species, and he believes in, again, he just believes droids are superior to humans. He wants to augment himself through droid parts and prosthetics and those things. And his ultimate goal is a device called the Phalanx Radix Transmitter. It somehow transmits to every droid in the galaxy to turn them on their masters. And it does this, it's active for 10 seconds. So there's a 10-second bit where young Ben Solo is on Coruscant, and some droid that's supposed to be cooking a meal for him takes out a knife, is literally about to kill young Ben Solo until that thing turns off, which honestly blows my mind just saying it out loud. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and also I think every protocol droid at least is programmed with like the maker in mind, but like not like their actual maker, but like some like God figure maker, which I think it's really funny when you see 3PO and thinking that Anakin made him, and then every time he's like thanking the maker, he's like thanking Anakin, and then all the other stuff when like thinking about when 3PO is talking about his own programming, and then thinking about 9-year-old Anakin programming that stuff in into 3PO is just really funny to think about.
Yeah, somehow he programmed over 6 million forms of communication into C3PO.
Well,
Yeah.
that's just some library you can buy.
Yeah.
Language
But yeah,
Yeah,
you
so,
think
no,
it,
someone I saw someone point that out. Like, how did Anakin know 6 million languages? And I thought to myself, like, well, couldn't he just like go on Star Wars eBay and like get a chip or something that had a bunch of languages in it?
yeah. But now I'm thinking, it's like, if a kid did that, like, if you were a 9-year-old, would you like put in fart jokes and stuff like that?
That'd be so funny.
Like,
Yeah.
seriously. I don't know, maybe Shmi had those removed later on. It's just like, I can't deal with the robot fart jokes.
That's a good headcanon. I'm gonna keep that from now on.
I just thought like the headcanoning that like when Anakin gives C3PO to Padme, like some like maybe she should find something, or like something like that accident, like C3PO accidentally says something like that, and she's like, oh, okay, we gotta go in there and do some editing because I can't have the protocol droid making fart jokes or whatever.
Honestly, like Anakin would find those funny even as like a adult,
Yeah.
He
as like
would.
a young adult.
Him and
Like,
Ahsoka would just laugh, and then everyone would just stand there like, okay.
Absolutely.
Knowing
yeah,
Anakin, he probably gifted to her intentionally.
yeah.
Oh, you have a meeting with all of the other senators? Well, let me give you C3PO. He's definitely not going to make 24 jokes in between.
Yeah, and then back to Suthoth, I think you had a little tangent you wanted to go on. And I think
I'm
it's
very
really
excited for
interesting
this
too.
tangent because I didn't know about what you're going to talk about until I looked at the notes today.
So, let me introduce you to the character which made me lose my mind. So, Meet Sister. Sister's a transgender clone introduced in Queen's Hope, which, side note, really good book, and the best in the Queen's trilogy. Please check it out. People have been sleeping on E.K. Johnston's work for far too long. Give her more work, please. Oh, wait, that's too mean. Give her more books to write, please. So, disclaimer is necessary in this point. I'm no doctor. I barely have a bachelor's degree in human biology, so most of my knowledge comes from reading a lot of journals and essays to try and understand this. So and all of those are not perfectly up to date. So a lot of stuff is not going to be completely accurate. So do your own research from modern reputable sources. So let's get into this. Any aspect of a person, that could be their height, skin color, lung capacity, or even gender identity, depends on two factors. First, it's a person's genetics and the environment they are or were in. So what does this mean if one of the clones are trans? So first of all, Sister is a reg. She's not a modified clone from all we know of. So that means her genetics is the same as every other clone. So just before we get into that, that implies that the Kaminoans have solved something called the N replication problem, which means during DNA replication, it's not perfect because some amount of DNA is going to be lost because it's not replicated based on how primers form. And usually we fix that by having regions called telomeres. And those make up for the buffer regions so that we can have all of our DNA being replicated. But Kaminoans somehow have been able to create their own telomeres and attach them to DNA, or just solve this problem altogether. And they've also somehow managed to perfect DNA repair mechanisms, so that replication errors like distorted sequences. So how much do people know about DNA sequences like adenine, guanine, cytosine, thymine, like some
I
amount of that?
recognize those
Yeah.
words, but
So-
Yeah, basically. Same.
So basically, adenine base pairs with thymine and guanine base pairs with cytosine, and we have DNA repairs to make sure that's what happens. And since all clones are essentially genetically identical, that means we have made sure that there's no damage caused by oxidative free radicals, ionizing radiation, stress, or chemotherapy, which could cause any damage and result in clones with some form of mutations. And Kaminoans would also have to control the gene expressed on homologous chromosome. So that's the one other than your sex chromosome. So each chromosome can have one, maybe two genes. Each chromosome can have a bunch of genes, but each pair of chromosomes can express up to multiple alleles. So Kaminoans have somehow managed to make sure that the same allele is always expressed for every gene for Jango Fett's genotype. And so based on that, which seems pretty standard because you want to have identical clone troopers, right? You don't want to have some errors anywhere. So that implies that every reg has the same genetics, right? That makes sense so far. So we also know from, I want to say the Domino Squad arc, the one with Clone Trooper 99, all clones are brought up in a standardized environment like training, learning, have a meeting with your meeting with your troop and everything like that. So their environment's the same, and that basically results in my dilemma here. All regs have the same genetics and the same environment, yet Sister exists. So we can make two possible conclusions based on this. Every single clone is trans, and no one has realized that yet. Was George Lucas making a 10D fucking chess move when he made the clones fight against the separatists whose acronym is the CIS?
Oh my
Answer me,
God.
George Lucas!
God.
Wow.
Wow, okay.
The other assumption is, all our assumptions are wrong. A person's phenotype in Star Wars depends on their genetics, their environment, and some mysterious third factor. And if that's the case, the Force, whatever. And if that's the case, then no medical technology can be applicable in Star Wars. They're in their own universe. So yeah, please read Queen's Hope. Try to make this make sense.
Okay, so the
I
only
mean,
thing I can remotely connect to this in terms of like differences in the clone's environment is like, okay, so like, yeah, they're brought up in the exact same quarters, same training, whatever. The differences are who they interact with. Like, you had those bounty hunters in that Clone Cadets arc, right? Who were like training them. Like, there was
yeah,
that, like, I don't remember their names or species, but like, there were those two dudes. And then
Yeah.
the commandos have like Mandalorian trainers and legends, etc. So, like, that's the only difference I can see in how they're brought up. But yeah, I don't really have much else to add on top of that.
It could be that, there's some sort of hormonal expression that happened with sister that, didn't happen with the others, that, maybe she came into contact with something, that came out of the lab that nobody else came in contact with. Accidents happen in labs, stuff gets dropped, and you know Kaminoans don't seem to really care. That there's like, oh well, there's 1.2 million of these, and certainly the existence of 99, and then later on the Bad Batch shows that that they'll keep the ones that aren't following the same mold. I mean, the Bad Batch is different because I think they were intentionally kind of created that way. But we see other clones that, I want to say there's one somewhere like Clone Cadets or something that were like, one of them has better eyesight than another. Again, it's like, shouldn't they all have the same? As for the telomere thing and solving that, my Star Warsologies co-host, Melissa, she did a panel at Comic-Con called The Science of Superheroes, and they talked about the superhero Replicate, who can replicate herself, and looking at that as kind of a rapid cloning mechanism. And there's real life sea urchins that can have, basically, when they reproduce and can kind of get cloned, their telomeres don't shorten. That they have something that preserves the length of their telomeres. So that exists on Earth somehow, and so maybe the Kaminoans had figured out how to incorporate that into their clones. But then again, we also see things like, oh wait, we can't make more clones because we don't have the Django DNA anymore.
Yeah,
So
that's one thing I wanted to bring up because like the Bad Batch did establish that like they were running out of Django's DNA and that's why they wanted Omega. But
yeah,
also like at this point canonically, why would they want to make more clones? That's another question entirely. But like the other thing I wanted to bring up is on the concept of mutations, with the Bad Batch, were they intentional or were they just byproducts that happened to be desirable?
I
So I'm
thought
not
they were
sure.
intentional. I
Yeah,
thought they said that.
they
Okay.
all
I
seem
forget.
to fit like D&D class roles, so I assume they were intentional, like
Yeah.
99.
Right,
I'm
right. Okay.
pretty sure they mentioned in some roundabout way it was intentional for them to have these abilities. Like Cody said, they're an experimental unit, which in my mind meant that the Kaminoans were like, what if we just like, had a little fun? We're making a whole bunch of like normal clones. Why don't we just see what we can do when we start playing around with Django's genetics? And then they got what they got.
Yeah.
it's like, let's turn up the strength on one, let's turn up the intelligence on one,
Exactly, exactly.
turn up the dexterity on one, turn up the
Yep.
charisma. Nah.
No, no. Ironically, the one with the lowest charisma got the love interest in the last season. So
Alas.
Pour one out for Tech.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah. But also, I think the thing with Sister is also because I mean, I know there's so much research going into like if there really is like a gene that like is like a switch or something in someone's brain, but also I think that like we've seen clones like go out drinking in Coruscant and stuff. And I think it's also just this whole thing. And like and I mean, at least in like the High Republic, there's like a bunch of like queer, like non-binary characters. So I think it's pretty obvious that like how gender works in Star Wars is also just as like a social construct, like just like the way it is here, but instead of like cultures and like countries, it's just different planets. Like different planets have different views on gender. And so maybe it's just like something with sister, just like I don't know where I'm going with this, but like something like that where like maybe coming in contact with like a culture made her discover more about herself, and then having her other clones and like people around her affirming that is also something that's really cool to see in Star Wars.
And maybe that, you know, Suthan's idea that's like, yeah, they're all actually trans. It could work if they will go to the same experience that sister had. Maybe they'd be affirmed that way and
I
be
like that
willing
idea
to.
purely because it'll piss off a lot of people.
Well,
And it is really funny that the separatists are cis. Like I
Yeah.
think that's been a joke in my head
Yeah.
for years.
I literally didn't even I would like I read the acronym as cis and it doesn't even click in my mind that like, oh, that's the term for non-trans people. Like
well, I don't think Tamara Morrison's cast as Rex and Ahsoka yet. So, Dave Filoni, if you're listening to this somehow, you have the chance to prove me right. Ahsoka season 2, come on, 2025.
It'll be later because of the strikes, but yeah.
Jane did want to talk about mono environmental worlds, which does sound pretty cool because I know nothing about environmental science, but it is really funny that every planet in Star Wars is just one climate.
Yeah,
Even
it's
though they're in different solar systems because like they each have like their own suns because like they're all called systems. Like, every planet is in a system, but they all have the same climate, even though I mean, I'm assuming that they all like revolve around their suns in the same way that our planets do. So yeah, I don't know, but
that's
that
just
is kind
another
of
one of those
crazy to think
things that I
about.
like make myself feel better about it by thinking about it from the writing standpoint of like it's just easier to have the desert planet rather than developing an entire planet with a bunch of different biomes and then like having to do like if you want a multi-planetary like setting for your writing, then like you have to come up with that for a whole bunch of different planets. So it's just so much easier to be like, here's the ocean planet, here's the desert planet, here's the planet that was completely like stripped of its resources and turned into a giant metropolis all the way around the globe. Like it's just easier to think about it that way. But then I am one of the people that thinks about like, well, that is not how a planet works. So
Plus, we do a lot of planet jumping in every Star Wars episode or even show, so it's real difficult to characterize a planet other than here's its major environmental feature.
yeah.
Yeah, and the weirdest thing is that each planet has like a single senator. Like, how hard would it be to pick like one person to represent Earth?
I always think
Like, if that
about
was
that,
possible, yeah.
like the planets in Star Wars don't have territories. It's just the planet. Like, there's no
Yeah,
countries.
Yeah.
How does that not happen? How do you unify an entire planet like that? It like
That's the plot of a Legends book. One of the X-Wing books, like Wedge has to
yeah,
unify a planet, basically.
yeah.
This is the
Starfighter
whole
from
okay.
plot
Adamar.
of Adamar, yeah.
Yeah, that's a great book.
Yeah, I read it like a week ago, actually. Super fun read. So
Yeah, that well, I don't know, for the monoclimate, you know, mono habitat thing that you know, there's a lot of planets that yeah, we only see one part of. It's like Dagobah, we kind of assume is all swamp, but we really only see like around Yoda's house. Um, that you know, you could if you went, you know, 30 miles away, would there be a sunny patch? And so you know, it like Tatooine we see a lot of, and you know, certainly from space we can see that like Hoth looks all white,
Yeah.
and you know, Tatooine is just different shades of tan. But yeah, that there certainly should be worlds that have you know colder poles and warmer tropical regions, and you know, and probably you know there's a ton of planets that just can't support life because you know like you know Earth is in the Goldilocks zone, and you have planets that are further out or closer that can't do it, and we just nobody goes to those. And you know sometimes we'll have gas giants and you know like Bespin or Yavin, and somehow moons can support life that you really can't have that. That moons have life and such.
yeah, the fact that most of the Star Wars planets just have air that you can just breathe, you just land and you can breathe normally is also weird because like I think there have been a few instances of like we have to wear these masks when we're on like an asteroid or something, but like on a planet, it's just always fine to land. So, and like, yeah, Earth is like really, really specific. Like we're like at the perfect distance from the sun, the perfect conditions, everything for life to exist. That and the sun exists under very specific conditions too. So in Star Wars, like Brian said, I think each system has a sun that's exactly like our sun with those very specific conditions, and the planets are located this very specific distance away, which yeah, it's a writing thing. That's just how you have to rationalize it.
But then again,
Yes.
we've discovered that there are binary systems with planets, so Tatooine could exist if it was at that right distance, which is pretty cool. That
Yeah,
Mhm.
I remember when that was like a news thing. Everyone was freaking out.
I think there was a Legends novel sometime back which said that life, or at least humans, originated in the core worlds, and once they started to discover intergalactic travel, they started to uh, basically habitate the mid-rim and outer rim, and I'm pretty sure it was said that they started to bring their own plants and other supplies that could eventually make the outer rim habitable. And they assume that's why oxygen is more widely available on most planets. Otherwise,
yeah, but
it
it's still like to terraform. The reason we have oxygen is for like billions of years of plant life on the planet before animal life, creating the oxygen that became our atmosphere. So either they have some way to rapidly terraform and rapidly change the atmosphere, or they just found all the planets. They're just like, hey, hop into the star system. Nope, none of these are habitable for life. And you do that like 500 times, but then you find the one that can support life and has an atmosphere already, and you're like, okay, we can live there.
Mhm.
But yeah, one of the other things that we've brought up on Star Warsologies is that people can travel to other planets that have life, and nobody is bothering about like, oh, I should get vaccinated against whatever local microbes. Like when Luke jumps in the swamp on Dagobah,
Oh my
he's
God,
picking
yeah.
up everything
Yeah.
that's in muck, and he should be probably really sick. But such is the Force.
Yep.
Yeah, James, I'm curious. Have you read the novel Shatterpoint?
Yeah, I read it
Yeah. So
way back in
there's
the day.
yeah, there's a lot of stuff about like the local animals, insects, plants on that planet sort of infecting the off-worlders. I remember there were a couple beats about that.
Mhm.
So yeah, I mean there are attempts at realism in some cases, I guess.
yeah, we
Yeah,
had the Death Troopers novel and the mind control worms from what's that place called?
yes. They were from
Oh,
Geonosis, wasn't it?
Geonosis.
Genosis.
Geonosis.
Yeah.
That's one of my favorite episodes.
That episode still freaks me out.
Yeah, honestly.
Yeah.
Same.
Very.
It's interesting though too, that like despite the whole thing with like, oh, a bunch of planets like already have oxygen, they're all like humans and other creatures are able to just go there and be able to breathe. Like they have like had some instances where that hasn't been the case. I don't know if this is true, but like on Rhodia, they all live under domes, and like I always assumed that was because they didn't have a breathable atmosphere, but they were like, why don't we try to live on this planet anyway? So they build the domes to live inside, and like they have a bunch of plants in there and stuff, and like a whole ecosystem going on. And then also like Plo Koon has to wear a mask because he can't breathe oxygen. Like I think his planet is Dorian, like whatever like their atmosphere is made of there, that's what he can breathe. And so if he leaves like that, like somehow like that one planet sustains a specific type of life, and if they leave that planet, they can't breathe what everyone else apparently can breathe. So it's just interesting to me like how they've like in
Yeah,
Star Wars we have had things exploring that, but then otherwise it's just no, everyone can breathe oxygen.
yeah.
Or all
For the
planets
most
have
part,
oxygen.
it's like Plo Koon and Zuckuss,
Yeah.
and maybe some of the like space suited people you see in the cantina, but
Yeah. There's Cad
it's
Bane, I guess. He has breathing tubes, right? Yeah.
I read that he has those in case he's in a situation where his trachea is blocked or something and he can just breathe through his.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
so that's how he
yeah.
survives Book of Boba Fett
It's
finale,
so he
guys.
can't get
Yeah.
it's so he can't get force choked by a
Yeah.
Jedi.
Interesting.
Big
Okay.
brain.
I just keep looking at him coming in and out of his cheeks. Like, what does he look like when he takes off? Does he have just like big holes in his cheeks, or?
They have actually animated him without them, and it's just like a normal face.
Yeah.
They didn't animate the holes. I guess probably because they didn't want to put that in a kid's show. Like that would have been weird.
Or they would have to figure out actually what is going on.
Yeah, like anatomically how that would work, and they were like, let's just not worry about it.
And you have the pikes as well. They always have those big like mask things on, right? I'm guessing those are some sort of breathing apparatus because like we've seen pikes take their helmets off sometimes. Like there's that one dude in the book of Boba Fett, right?
Yeah.
Who took it off. But then also like if he can take his off, why can't the rest of them? Is it not a breathing thing? Is it just like a cultural thing? I'm not too clear on the in-universe thing for the pikes, but
Something
that
I
was
just thought of
interesting.
that is probably stupid and wrong, but like maybe it's a breathing thing because they totally screwed up their atmosphere with all the spice that they smoke.
It could also be a matter of lung capacity. Maybe pikes have really large lungs, and that can like allow them to survive without their breathing masks for a few hours or something.
Interesting. Yeah, I can see that.
What if it's just that they don't like the way other people smell, and they're just like, dude, we got to keep this on. You guys just so nasty.
Yeah.
And that droid over there is making farts, so
Yeah. What else did Shane have? He wanted to talk about the empty Kaminoan oceans. I don't know what he wanted to talk about specifically, but
Oh, I feel like the Kaminoan oceans are kind of similar to the deep oceans right now of Earth. So it's kind of weird that there isn't much wildlife per se, because and the wildlife that exists should be extremely large based on our equivalents. Because if it's a vast ocean, you need to be extremely large so that you can travel large distances to find wherever your next source of food is. And whenever we saw Kamino getting blown up in season 1 of The Bad Batch, we barely saw anything. I think the closest we saw were like some rayfish or something in
I know in the
other.
Clone Wars there was that one creature that Obi-Wan hitched a ride on, but that was like kind of, and it was like both ocean and an air creature, and like that's it. That's all we see of like creatures on Kamino.
yeah, we see the Iwas in
Mhm.
Attack of the Clones that you see them riding on it, but Iwas also I think exist on other planets, so it could be that they're not native.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that what we know about Kamino's oceans is not very much in terms of what lives there.
Was there ever a Legends novel about how Kamino exists in the first place? Are Kaminoans their native inhabitants,
I
or
believe
did
it
they
I
come
was
from
touched on in
elsewhere?
Republic Commando, I think, because there were a lot of Kaminoans. And it's interesting to me because like if the Kaminoans are supposed to be the native species of Kamino, they don't look like aquatic creatures at all, right? And like
Yeah.
we haven't seen any islands, anything where they can live on Kamino that's not just an ocean or the platforms and cities that they've built. So how Kamino originated is a weird topic. It's been a mystery.
Well, one of the theories that was kind of presented within the universe is that it used to not be an ocean world, that the Kaminoans screwed up their environment, and sea level rise basically sank all of their land masses. And to survive, they just kept building up above the water line. And so that's why they don't look aquatic. And yeah, that they're kind of hosed, that they're basically living on giant oil platforms.
I was just thinking that their planet is probably like a Tatooine situation where Tatooine used to be covered with water and now it's not. So, like you said, they've screwed up their environment and now they are covered in water and they're not aquatic, so they have to figure out how to deal with it.
In the meanwhile, what has been everyone's favorite aspect of Star Wars, which they've learned from extra material? Like, just could be like, I learned this from a science-based thing that actually makes some plot point make sense in retrospect. Stuff like that.
For
Yeah,
me, I think the coolest thing about Star Wars is like hyperspace travel. Uh, and like especially James, have you read like the High Republic books and stuff?
Phase one I haven't gotten into
Phase
phase two
one,
yet.
yeah. So like just like the stuff with like the emergencies and like the great disaster, and also in like the Thrawn novels, how and like using like a mass shadow to like draw um to like draw ships out of hyperspace and ships running into mass shadows, which is why they're hyperspace lanes. I think that makes so much sense. Um, that like why they're like hyperspace lanes that have to be rooted out and like they can close off hyperspace lanes for travel across the galaxy because it's like okay, yeah, like that makes sense. Like because when you're in hyperspace, like you're in this like pseudo reality where like you're going through real space, but you're also not. But everything in real space leaves like a shadow in hyperspace. So you can still run into it, and places in real space's gravity still affects things in hyperspace. I just think that's like something really cool for some reason. Like I just find that really fascinating. And I think that also plays into like Interstellar. I really like Interstellar and like the science in that is super cool.
That's one of my favorite sci-fi films. It's incredible.
Yeah, but like hyperspace and like the whole stuff with that, I think really makes a lot of other stuff in Star Wars start to make sense.
I don't know.
It's
I
really
like droids.
sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
I like droids as just a thing from Star Wars that because I don't know, it's just they're cool.
I like thinking about the AI aspect of it, especially in today's day and age, and like and how AI is becoming more of a thing because I'm pretty against the development of AI. I don't like it. I'm afraid of a robot uprising. Also, the fact that it's like stealing jobs from people and like and it's just interesting to think about that in terms of Star Wars. So
Yeah, I mean, in my case, yeah, I am into sort of the notion of hyperspace travel. That's always sort of just amazed me, like especially the Nile paths, sort of how that works in the High Republic. Like, I think that's really cool. But like, yeah, I mean, it's just really cool to think about because like there were some books I think way back when I think Dawn of the Jedi sort of establishes like there is no light speed travel. It's just in system. So like the whole book takes place within one system, right? And then just sort of how that travel's evolved over time, like the differences between like Legends and canon, because in canon, hyperspace travel evolves far quicker than Legends, because High Republic is 200 years before the prequels, and they're just traveling into the Outer Rim. Hyperdrives are not a super old technology at this point, whereas in Legends, you go like 1,000 years ago, Bane trilogy, they're everywhere, right? So just sort of the historical aspects of that and like how that ties in between the two timelines is pretty compelling to me. And then, yeah, I think Shane just joined.
Me? Am I audible?
yes,
Yes.
you are.
Excellent. Hi. So sorry I'm late. Hi James, my name is Shane.
Hello.
I just recently graduated from UCSD with a bachelor's degree in marine biology. And since graduating UCSD, I've made the idiotic decision to try and start my own content creation company, and that's made me slowly be pulling out my hairs every single day of my life. But yeah, I mean, so we were talking technological advancement. That was what the topic was right now.
Yeah, so we went through most of the notes we had. We briefly talked about your topics, like the mono environmental worlds and like the Kamino oceans, but if you have more to say on those, you can probably go ahead.
I mean, I guess my fascination with Star Wars, in terms of like keeping to the topic we're just on with technological advancement, is I feel like with the High Republic, Star Wars almost went in a direction that's more realistic. In the real world, we can see that technological advancement increases on an exponential scale, where the amount of capability that we have as people increases drastically every single year. Whereas in the Legends Star Wars canon, everything kind of looked the same 1,000 years before the Star Wars universe. Like, it's the silliest and stupidest thing, but my biggest complaint about watching like trailers and gameplay of Knights of the Old Republic is, why do the lightsabers have the same size battery? Like the hilts never change size because the battery requirements never change size because the technology is just the same throughout the board. So I feel like having hyperspace be just like it's just coming into its own during this era, having it be a thing where they're just getting to the outer rim, like that is a significant like improvement towards bringing it towards realism. Because I mean, in the real universe, if you have a discovery of hyperspace travel and traveling to the outer rim, you would see this kind of increase in 200, 300 years. You would see it suddenly become not only commonplace, but just continuously being growing more and more and more, where by the time of the New Republic and the sequels, they're doing like sub hyperspace travel, which is how they're able to destroy the New Republic. They shoot at like a weapon through differing levels of hyperspace to get increasing speed. So I mean, I guess that's where my fascination lies in the advancement. I don't know what if y'all have touched on that, or if that's even makes any sense to y'all, but
No, I think that is a good point, that, we've seen, especially in the EU and stuff, that pretty much, yeah, progress, there isn't progress. It's just static, that everything that they have in the Empire era, they had, 2,000, 1,000, 4,000 years ago, just with a different name, but it pretty much all looked the same. And so, yeah, the idea that there's progress, that like the Empire is developing new technology to, blow stuff up, that nobody had thought to do. And it's like a whole stagnation of the galaxy for a long time, versus, now we're looking at with the High Republic. It's like, yes, there's actual progress, that things are advancing. What we know about the galaxy, we're expanding. Yeah, and that's kind of a huge, frame shift for Star Wars.
And then yeah, in the High Republic, we were talking a bit earlier about Bacta. It is discovered during the High Republic. I believe this is Hetzel, the planet in like the opening of Light of the Jedi, where Bacta is discovered. It's a big resource. It is a point of contention, and that's just another instance of just the progression over time. Like this is how this pivotal medical technology was discovered, was created. It's not explained, but yeah, I think that's just another cool example of just better continuity in that sense in canon.
yeah, I mean, taking it towards, I mean, I guess ramping back to the topics that are kind of in my section and tying it to it as a marine bio major. Obviously, my fascination in Star Wars is water worlds, because they have such a wide and varied like representation in Star Wars. If you think all the way back to like Tartakovsky, I think his name is, his Clone Wars miniseries, when we went to Mon Cala and we had like the comic series that were based on that, that was like a vibrant underwater world with a whole variety of things. But then if we take like Bad Batch, Clone Wars, we go to Kamino. Kamino is empty. Like we see their oceans and there's nothing in them. And so like looking at the development of science over time, if you've got a culture like Kamino, which is incredibly reliant on scientific advancement in order to survive and to market itself in the galaxy, I would love to see stories that go back into this time frame, that check out their area and show what's been going on their planet. Because having a planet that is entirely devoid of like 90% of life in the oceans, like it had to get there at some point. And if we take the same like rate of advancement, and like the morbid rate of advancement we see in the real world, where we see in the real world our emptying of our oceans through our own actions of things like overfishing, like it makes me wonder, is there a time period where that empty ocean wasn't empty? Like, and what does that look like? Like what kind of monstrosities evolved to survive in a world that is suddenly a global ocean?
Microplastics. That's what I got right now. They killed all the life because they had microplastics.
I'm just gonna headcanon that because that makes the most sense to me.
I
Kaminoans would
like
do.
that.
Yeah.
That seems like something they would do. Yeah, I mean it's interesting because like in that time frame, you've got such an industrialized galaxy that is industrializing even further. Like they're discovering all these things that by the time we saw the original films that came out in the 70s and 80s, they're just commonplace, that everyone has them in this galaxy, right? And that's going to have an impact on the native worlds of millions of planets. So the question is, when they because they're planning on making material that goes way back in the Star Wars universe. What kind of difference are we gonna see in the literal evolution of native environments across the galaxy? We've already seen one. Like I don't know if is everyone caught up to date on The Mandalorian. Yeah, so we've already seen one. We've seen the Gardens of Mandalore, and we've seen the impact of environmental degradation on that planet, and it's bouncing back. So like, the question is, if we got the High Republic, and the High Republic is very clearly like it's their next big push. They've had what, 3 phases of publishing, 3 phases of publishing already, and they're releasing the Acolyte in that time frame. What's the natural environment that these characters visit going to look like in that time? Are we going to see why there's a 500-foot long lizard man running around Naboo's oceans casually, like this beautiful, peaceful planet known for its peaceful prosperity, and it's got a casual ocean Godzilla? Like, what are we going to see in the High Republic is the big question, because they've already
Always the bigger
shown
fish.
there's always a bigger fish. Yeah, and I mean, they've already shown some interesting creatures where they got like those weird like plant things that like infect people and all that kind of crazy stuff. So
Yeah, in terms of the High Republic and sort of seeing planets over time, the one that comes to mind is Coruscant, because I believe there was a moment in Light of the Jedi, correct me if I'm wrong, Brian or James, where Chancellor So sits on like the last patch of like untouched land, like the last mountain that like hasn't been touched by any form of construction or anything. Um, that was in Light of the Jedi, right?
Yeah, and
Okay.
I think it's in The Mandalorian too.
Is it that mountain top
Uh,
that we see?
Yeah, at Monument
yeah,
Plaza or
yeah,
whatever it is,
Right,
because
is
right.
the
Okay.
highest peak.
yeah, because like it's like the peak that like peaks out, which is crazy to think about.
Yeah, so that moment was cool because at that point, you know, I didn't know about Monument Plaza like existing canonically. I don't know if it did at the time of Light of the Jedi. It might have, but seeing that
It's
was
been
like,
there a long time.
okay, yeah.
yeah, that was a Clone Wars introduction. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, you know what? You might be right. I just remembered that one episode with Satine, right, where she's going around Coruscant, and then yeah, but you know, just that moment was cool just for what it meant, because I think she was reflecting on Coruscant and being like, we've touched every corner of this planet, we've made it our own. You know, this is really all that's left. And if we go back 1,000 years and see Coruscant in canon, maybe during some Old Republic content or something, it would be cool to see more areas of Coruscant that aren't just cities. You know, more mountains. I think there were oceans like way back when. It was an Earth-like planet essentially. I think way back when was what was established, I believe. So I think that could be cool as we go further back.
I mean, I guess this raises the question then, just around the board. What are people's thoughts of the Lucasfilm announcement that was like a year or 2 ago that said they're going to be setting things like tens of thousands of years in the past, basically going into that same time scale that the old EU is in? What are y'all thoughts on that, with everything we discussed of like watching technology evolve and like watching planets evolve and all of that?
I think it makes sense for it to be that far back, just considering how long it would take for the technology to develop, for Coruscant to develop, to turn the whole planet into a city. Just for the timeline of a lot of things that happen in Star Wars, it makes sense that the timeline is that long.
I don't know. I think it's mostly just like, hey, we have a new era to play in storytelling wise that doesn't necessarily connect to anything we know, and we can kind of extrapolate backwards to the level of tech and development that we see. That, you know, it'd be interesting to see, you know, Tatooine as the lush world with water, or, you know, Coruscant pre total development, but also see what like the Force traditions are like, that you know, before the Jedi, before the Sith, what was there? You know, before the Republic, what was there?
Yeah, like definitely like from like the political side of it, it'll be really cool to see. But also, I think like technologically, like looking at like the legends, or like honestly, in my head, the current Legends Old Republic stuff is canon because, like you said, like it's so far back in time that doesn't affect anything in the current canon. But like there's like proto sabers and stuff like that, like backpacks like strapped to their back. for like lightsabers, which would be pretty cool to see. And then like also, I mean, I guess hyperspace travel was established in the Old Republic by like the Rakata people. So if they like do something with that, like I think space travel would be the coolest thing to see happen in that beginning era.
Yeah, like the book Dawn of the Jedi establishes there is basically no hyperspace travel. I don't think the word hyperspace is even mentioned in the book. Like the whole book takes place within one system. It takes place in the Tython system. So the whole plot is like Tython with different biomes and then like two of its moons, right? So that's the extent of space travel we're gonna see, which if they're adapting Dawn of the Jedi into a movie, I don't know, are they gonna have hyperdrives because they want to show off new planets and do that sort of thing just for the cinematic nature of it, right? But at the same time, canonically, I don't know if that would really line up. And then Shane, we were talking about this at Comic Con about how like Dawn of the Jedi being set as far ago as it is, like how different would the Jedi have been, right?
Yeah, I mean, my thing with this, my one thing of caution when I look at them saying, "Oh, we're going to go back so far," is that if we look at human history, so like for background as well, I got a minor in archaeology anthropology, so this was my jam when I was a student. But like if we go back 25,000 years in our own history, the majority of the planet didn't have crops yet. Like we invented agriculture 5 6 times on various different continents, and the majority of the continents hadn't invented that yet. The majority of human groups were still migrating, and they were still hunter-gatherer groups for the most part. There were multiple species of hominid on Earth, depending on who you ask. That's a spicy topic in anthropology. But like, if we look at the Star Wars universe in that same lens, if we go that far back, my curiosity is the same. What comes before the Jedi? Because we have no cultural or civilization movement that exists in the real world that has lasted that long. Just not even a fraction. The longest continuous cultural like timeline that I know of in all of human history and anthropology is Egypt. And that was a culture that lasted approximately 5,000 years. So a fifth of the time that Star Wars claims to kind of have these long aging monastic orders. So the question is, if they do go that far back, for the Star Wars universe, that's going back to, for us, basically the age of sword and sorcery, high fantasy. So what is out there? Like what comes before that? I liked in Legends, to go to Brian's point of Old Republic Legends. One of the things I really liked from Old Republic Legends is one of the ways they got around these far ancient past travel considerations is they had precursor civilizations. They took the Stargate route where they're like, oh, some ancient long dead species, right, whose time as a civilization came and went, left behind all this stuff, and various groups are able to use it. And they had to have it like 5 or 6 times to imply that this galaxy is incredibly old. It's incredibly mature as a galaxy. It's had multiple galactic civilizations rise, fall, and completely fade out of existence, to the point that in the Old Republic, there were systems of like interstellar travel that nobody knew how they worked. They just knew they did. And like nobody really knew where they came from. They just knew they were there. Or they knew what species made them, but by the time they got to the place that the species came from, the species were like this big, tiny little lizards. So I think that there's a lot of potential there to explore that kind of idea. My one hesitancy is just like when they've discussed going that far back in the past, they've discussed it as we're going to go and see the very birthplace and origins of the Jedi and like the origins of these orders and the origins of the ancient conflict between the Jedi and the Sith. And in the real world, we just haven't seen any culture of any form last that long. So the question is, how? Like, how? It's the big question. How do you get something that lasts over 20,000 years, like, of time?
The Jedi are just built different.
Well, I think part of it is you look at we also have really long-lived species like Yoda's species that maybe maybe that plays in that things last longer because you have some species that are holding the galaxy together because of their longevity. I don't know. I just thought of that right now.
That makes a lot of sense. Like I've never heard that point before, but like that does make sense that if they're living so long, then maybe their order is going to last proportionately as long.
Yeah, and I mean, actually, this makes a lot of sense taking a combination of science and anthropology. If you look at these long-lived species, right, of creatures that live 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 years, their cultural time frames are going to look so different. Like part of the reason you could argue part of the reason that we as a species advance so quickly is we die so quickly. Like we have maybe 100 years if we are lucky and in the top like 1% of people who survive to make our mark on this earth and change things, right? And so we evolved to be rapidly fast thinking. Our societies are rapidly fast moving. Our technological development is rapidly fast moving. If you got 10 times the time frame of life, yes, you could theoretically get 10 times more if your brain is wired the same way and if your culture has the same social concepts that we do and the same like ideas surrounding it. But if you live for 1,000 years, like Yoda's species, like Maz Kanata's species, like the Hutts, like what reason would your culture have to move that quickly? It's a blink, you know, it's a fraction of an eye. There's been a joke that I've heard cracked a couple dozen times, which is Han had to die before Chewie in the real Star Wars because Han was basically Chewbacca's dog. Because Chewbacca lives so much longer than Han Solo. Wookiees live to like 300. So like in that context, a dude who's gonna live to 85, that's your dog, right? Like, so like in that context, there's no cultural reason for you to try and change your society so heavily you get a new iPhone every 3 months. You're okay with your iPhone lasting 4 years. Why? Because to you, that's 3 months, you know? So in the combination of those two things, yeah, I think it could be a very real possibility that these long-lived species are a major driver for that, especially if they are more active in the Jedi Order than they are in the prequels and in the mainline like time frame that we're used to. Because if you make it that there's these long-lived species, but they're kind of on their way out, because let's be honest, we don't see a lot of Hutts. They're not exactly what I would call physically adapted to the rest of the galaxy. So like, and we don't see a lot of Yoda species. We see like one member of Maz Kanata species. Like if you argue that these species were dominant, but they're on their way out because the more rapid I die quicker and I'm your pet dog species of humanity is taking hold. Like this could be Lord of the Rings. Like we could just be watching Star Wars Lord of the Rings where the high elves are leaving Middle Earth. Deal with your own problems. Like and I think that could be really interesting, seeing how the cultures differ and like how the religious elements of the Jedi came about from these I live to be ungodly age, basically Glorfindel of Star Wars characters.
It turns out that Sarlaccs have actually, you know, they're on their way out too. They used to be really sentient and actually go places, and yeah, now they just are holes in the ground.
What piece of media is a sentient moving around Sarlacc in? I want to read about that.
I just came up with that now, so
Oh, you
run
did?
with
Oh,
it.
okay. I thought you were referencing something that.
No,
So
no,
what
oh my
I'm-
god, that would be so awesome.
So what I'm hearing is an Old Republic Star Wars horror film. Can you imagine? That would be the most terrifying horror monster on the face of the earth. Imagine a Sarlacc that can move and talk to you.
Yeah.
Like that's a nightmare.
Just like giant Drengir, but they took over a Sarlacc.
Yeah, basically.
Oh my god,
That'd be really
Oh my-
scary.
that would be scary. Drengir mixed with Sarlacc.
Yeah. That's just a
Awesome.
Sarlacc with the dark side of the Force in it as well. So that would, yeah.
That's
that would
Sarlacc.
be terrifying.
That is actually, if you think about it, that is kind of like some Legends material, because there are some Legend characters that are just eternally hungry, and like there's some Sith Lords and Legends that just they consumed whole worlds just over the course of time because they were so damn hungry. That's basically that, except giant. Like
I gotta get going here, but this was a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you so
Yeah,
much for
awesome.
joining
Thanks,
Thank you so
us.
thanks for
much.
being on.
A
Yeah.
really good first guest episode.
I don't know why you picked me, but I've had a blast.
Right. So where can everyone find you?
Everyone can find me. I don't know. You don't see any of the stuff in the background. No. I am on social media at James Jawa on Twitter and Instagram. You can look up Star Warsologies at Star Warsologies on Twitter and Instagram. You can find Star Warsologies on pretty much all your favorite podcast sites, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Odyssey, Libsyn, Amazon. You can check out some of my work in issues of Star Wars Insider Magazine. I have one coming out soon, but I don't know when it will be. And some of my old work is on StarWars.com.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for
joining
sharing.
us.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thanks so much
Yeah.
for coming on.
Yep. Thank you.
All right, that's all from us this episode. Stay tuned for the next, where we discuss the first half of Bad Batch Season 3. Triton Squadron out.